Welcome back to another episode of Divine Journey 2. In the last episode, we got access to Lightning Craft, where we set up the Lightning Crusher here, and we also set up the little modular machinery Lightning Craft Infusion multi-block. And we also got access to Extreme Reactors, where we are turning Yellorium into Cyanite, and then turning the Cyanite into Plutonium. The plan for today is to get into chapter 23, which is all about Astral Sorcery. First up, we're going to have to make our Astral Tome, which is just a book surrounded by some parchment. Next up, we're going to need some rock crystal ore, and it doesn't actually generate in this pack. Instead, we have to induction smelt it with stone and some shattered mystical iron crystals. And to get those crystals, we just have to explode some mystical iron ingots. And I didn't actually read this quest. It turns out we get the Astral Tome as a reward. So I crafted it for nothing, but I guess it's fine. It wasn't that expensive to craft anyways. And now we can make our first Astral Sorcery crafting table, which is the Luminous crafting table, with some mystic ingots, some runed marble, plutonium, and 3 basic crafting tables. And the last thing we need is our resonating wand, which takes some sparkling aquamarine, plutonium, engraved marble, and some mystic ingots. We also need 3 constellation papers. Alright, if we want to start crafting with Astral Sorcery, we're going to actually have to wait for it to get nighttime, as Astral Sorcery's power source is this little bar down here, and as it keeps getting darker until midnight, this bar will keep filling up, and there's actually multiple ways to fill this bar up, one of which is the higher you are, the more starlight the altar will gather. You can also use a collector crystal to buff it, or you can find a little area where there's a lot of concentrated starlight, but to actually find those areas we have to make a Phosic resonator. But for right now, I think we can deal with this until we get the Phosic resonator. So the first item we're going to make is the light well. Next up, we're going to make some illumination powder. And finally, we're going to make up some glass lenses. To actually make our Phosic resonator, we're going to need a bucket of liquid starlight. And there's multiple ways you can get it, either by putting aquamarine in light wells, or you can also put rock crystals in them, and they'll slowly start gathering some starlight. And it's better to do this at night, as you'll get more starlight than during the day. And eventually they'll break, so you'll have to probably set up an automated system with multiple of these eventually. After a bit of waiting, we can upgrade our Luminous crafting table to the Starlight crafting altar. If we want to actually use our Starlight crafting altar, that's actually a bit different from the Luminous crafting table, since this actually requires a structure to be built around it, as the Starlight is red. So I'm going to build that structure really quickly. Right, I've also come up to Y212, so we almost have full starlight in the second tier of crafting altar now. After a bit of waiting for starlight to collect, we can make our first collector crystal. And the stats aren't that great right now, but we can upgrade that in the future. If we want to actually use our collector crystal, we're going to have to make a linking tool so we can link it to our altar. we want to find constellations and the star, we're going to have to make our looking glass. And since we have the Starlight Altar, we can upgrade it to the block version instead of the handheld. And I've actually gone ahead and automated the collection of Starlight here. So on the sides here, I just have mechanical users on activate block with item. That's what actually puts the crystals into the light wells here. And then underneath it just has some ender fluid conduits extracting and putting into this portable tank. And then hoppers obviously for extra storage. So to actually use this telescope, you basically turn it with the arrows on the right here, and you're looking for these big stars here. And in the book, it actually shows you how to draw it. So kind of have to match the shape up. So I believe this is Armara. So if we connect them, there we go. I'm going to do this for the rest of the constellations that are in the sky currently, and I'll be back. Another reason we needed this collector crystal here is actually for star metal ore. And in this pack, it's changed. Instead of iron ore, we have to use ludicrous ore. And if we actually take our collector crystal, right click it, and then bind it to these blocks, in a few seconds here, they should turn into star metal ore. Now that we have star metal ingots, we can upgrade our Starlight Crafting Altar to the 3rd tier, the Celestial Altar. Since we have our Celestial Altar now, we can make the Starlight Infuser. Alright, I've gone ahead and made the structure here for the Starlight Infuser. And if we put in a sparkling aquamarine and tap it with the wand, in a few seconds, we'll get the resonating gem. And if we put some regular wood in the Starlight Infuser and click it with the wand, we'll get some vibrant infused wood. And using the resonating gem we just made, we can make the clippers, as well as the gardening trowel. And we can use the vibrant infused wood to make the seed analyzer. And if we take a book and combine it with some growth infusion liquid, we'll get our seed journal. Alright, and now that we have access to Agricraft, I went ahead and made all of the Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 seeds that the quest book said to make. And I'm slowly but surely leveling them up to 10, 10, 10. And I'm using a design by Grom here. And I'll have a link in the description to his little tutorial on how to set this up. But the basic way this works is these 3 player simulators here are what actually place the crop sticks. And these 2 on the sides here are what actually place the seeds. And then the block readers on the back here read the status of these crops. And once a crop grows here, it'll send a redstone signal to these mechanical miners here, which are linked to these ender porcupines, which will pick up the crops, and all the drops will end up in this drawer. And once the seed from the middle ends up in here, it'll check if it's higher than the left or the right, and if it is, it'll break that respective side and replace it with the higher crop in this drawer. And if it's lower, it'll just go into a buffer crate here. And finally, there's a slight modification since we don't need strength in this playthrough because weeds are disabled, so we're only looking for the growth and the gain stats to be 10 and 10. So instead of checking for, this was 30 for max level, I'm only checking for 20, the first 2. But yeah, that's the basic setup. If you want a more in-depth explanation, check out Grom's video in the description. Next up, we're going to make a better collector crystal than the one we have currently. And to do that, we're actually going to make a celestial collector crystal. And right now, the highest purity rock crystal that I found was a 93%. So that's good. The size and the cutting doesn't really matter right now because we can always level that up later on. But to actually get our celestial crystal growing, we have to throw the rock crystal and a piece of stardust into a pool of liquid starlight. And in a couple seconds, it should form the actual seed, I guess, and start growing. Next up, we're going to make the attunement altar, which will allow us to attune both ourselves as well as our collector crystals to specific constellations. And we're also going to need a few spectral relays. Next up, we're going to need a few nocturnal powder. I've also went ahead and made up the imperfect ritual stone. And if you put a lapis lazuli block on top of it and right click, you actually change it to dusk. So that's very useful for Astral Sorcery. Next up, we're going to make the stellar refraction table, which is going to allow us to make some enchanted books that we can't get normally. And we also need a piece of infused glass. Alright, and to actually use our stellar refraction table, we have to place our infused glass on it. And then we have to place in our parchment as well. And to actually infuse it to a constellation, we have to pretty much overlay the same constellation 3 times. And obviously the parchment will burn up if we don't do it right. So I'm going to do this a few more times and I'll be back. There we go. Got our engraved glass and it's attuned, or not attuned, it's for Discadia. Now if we take out the parchment and put in a book, in a few seconds we should get our enchantments that we need. Right, we got sharpness 8 or 7 and power 7, which is what we need. And we actually need this in separate books, so if we just use the enchantment extractor, I have a power 4 and a sharpness 7 book. And if we combine all those books that we made with the parchment, we can make our Enchanter's PhD. Want to make our iridescent altar, we're going to need 2 purple colored lenses. Right, I've gone ahead and made a little basic setup here with integrated dynamics to level up the size of our collector crystal. So the way this works is when you drop a collector crystal into liquid starlight, over time it'll increase the size up to 900, and eventually it'll consume the liquid starlight like it did. So just have a fluid placer refilling that, and that's always active. But I have a little entity reader here reading the information on that little crystal there. And then in this variable store, I have a bunch of variable cards because the MT value is nested in a bunch of other MBT. So basically just reading the contents of the MBT. So the first one is item, then the tag, then Astral Sorcery, then crystal properties, then finally size. And then I'm in this redstone right here. If the size is equal to 900, it's going to turn on this vacuumulator and pick up the crystal here and put it into the chest. We're also going to make the grindstone, which will allow us to increase the cutting of our crystals as well. Right, our celestial crystal has reached a size of 900. So the cutting is currently 57%, but if we place it on the grindstone here and click it a few times, then the cutting is now 73, but the size has also went down. So you have to be careful not to take the size down too low, or else the crystal will break. Right, our cutting is now 100%. Right, I've gone ahead and made another celestial crystal as we need it for the upgrading of our altar. And I actually have to attune this to, it could be any constellation, so I just picked Avitus. And to actually do that, you hold the constellation paper in your offhand. You can see the blue particles around the attunement octa here. That's where we place our spectral relays. And now if we throw in our crystal, it should attune itself to Avitus. And with that, we can upgrade our altar to the iridescent altar. Right, and I've added the marble bricks here, and that's all we need to upgrade this structure and allow the iridescent altar to work. Next up, we're going to make the observatory, which will allow us to see the dim constellations. But to do that, we actually have to make a ritual pedestal. Further, we're actually going to have to attune ourselves to a constellation. And the one I picked is Visio, as to level up that perk, all you have to do is just move around. So yeah, let's attune ourselves. Now that we're attuned, if we move around a bit, in the top left, there's a bar that's actually leveling up quite quickly. So that is our current current perk level. And if I actually look in the book, there's a new tab for perks. And since we attuned ourselves to Vicio, that is the one that got unlocked. And there's basically a whole boatload of different perks we can select. For example, movement speed, we can increase our health somewhere, we can have more armor, we could resistance, I think there's damage too. But yeah, I guess I'm gonna run around a bit and level up, and I'll be back. If we actually make a few more constellation papers, we'll actually discover the dim constellations now. And Lucerna was actually the one we were looking for. Coming back to the perks menu for a second, the first big perk that we actually want is this singularity right here, which will allow us to unlock the other routes without connecting them through other perks. So to actually do that, we're going to have to go down here and make a path all the way up. But I actually don't want these movement speed perks right now, since our armor gives enough speed as it is. So if we take one of these stealing sigils and put it on the perk, or I guess we have to unlock it first. We put it on the perk, actually disable it until we double click to break it. That's actually quite handy, as I don't want to get too quick, since our armor gives us enough speed as it is. Right, I've also gathered up enough perk points to be able to unlock Singularity. And I think for right now, I'm also going to unlock the Avidus route, which will give us some extra maximum life. And I've also gone ahead and attuned a rock crystal to Lucerna, and we can now make our observatory. And also, since we have our Radiant Altar, we're going to make the Containment Chalice, which will allow us to refill our little starlight over there a lot easier. Alright, I've actually had to make another crystal because I didn't realize I used it when I made the ritual pedestal. I've gone ahead and made it, and our purity went down to 60%, which is kind of bad. But we can increase it. If we drop a max size crystal into some liquid starlight, it has a chance of splitting into 2 crystals. Alright, and our crystals have split. Let's see if we got lucky. We got plus 7% purity. Alright, I've gone ahead and leveled up our celestial crystal. So we now have a perfect crystal that's attuned to Avidus. And the way I got the purity up is just from throwing it into a bunch of liquid starlight. And I basically had it split a whole bunch of times. That's why I have so many regular collector crystals, because I got really unlucky with the purity leveling up. But eventually I got it to 100%. Then I increased the size to 900, and then the cutting to 900. And now we can make our perfect collector crystal. To progress further, we're going to have to make our resplendent prism. Next up, we're going to have to make our Astral Core. And to do that, we're going to have to attune 4 different celestial crystals to the dim constellations. And to actually attune a crystal to a dim constellation, we first have to attune it to a bright constellation. So I just picked Armara here because that was what was in the sky. So we're going to attune these to the bright constellation first. I attuned our 4 crystals to the same bright constellation of Armara, and I also got the attunement altar set up for our first dim or faint constellation, Alcara. We also need to attune a crystal to Gelum. As well as Ulteria. Finally, Vorux. And if we combine all 4 of the attuned crystals with our splendid prism, we can make our Astral Core. And with that, we can make our Star of Revelation. And to unlock the gate into Galacticraft, we have to make these galactic ingots. And before we end off this episode, I wanted to show off this new area that I made. It's our little crop growing area, and I have a whole bunch of seeds planted that are all 10-10-10. And basically the way this works is there are a bunch of hydrators all around the crops. That's what's speeding up the growth. Then to actually harvest the crops, down here I have a little player simulator and a little horn of the wild in this chest here. And this basically just clicks it and holds it down long enough so that the crops pop off. Then to collect it, there's just accumulators filtered for every single type of essence, and they'll go into drawers that are fully upgraded with void upgrades. Then down here, they're all extracting and going into the various different sequential fabricators. So for example here, it's just a whole bunch of ingots and stuff. Here's all the wood, the saplings, and pretty much anything we need auto-crafted will go down here eventually. And this is obviously not done. There's still a whole boatload more of seeds to make. But yeah. With that being said, I'm going to end this episode here. So yeah, thanks for watching.